Afreilich in Purim, happy Purim, Purim Sameach, whatever language you speak. Today is a very great day, the happiest day on the Jewish calendar. La Yehudim hayta ora v'simcha v'sason v'ikar. The Megillah says as a result of the Purim miracle, the Jews had light and joy and gladness and honor. And in addition to the physical, simple meaning that the Jewish people had this miracle, which caused them so much great goodness, the Talmud says that Oira, Simcha, Sasin, V'yikar shouldn't just be translated literally. Oira zu Torah, says the Gemara. Light is Torah. Simcha ze Yom Tov. Simcha means they were able to celebrate holidays once again. Sasin ze Milah. Gladness refers to the Bris Milah. They were able to celebrate this mitzvah with great joy. V'yikar elu tefillin. And honor refers to the tefillin that the Jewish people wore proudly. And the Rebbe once said that this Gemara is not just making some nice homiletical interpretation that light is this and simcha is that. Torah is telling us that for a Jew, real light is Torah. Oira zu Torah. What is a Jew's light? A Jew's light comes from Torah. What does light add to a room? Nothing actual. There's no content added to the room when you turn on the light, but everything becomes clear. Torah brings us clarity in our life. What's true joy? Simcha ze Yom Tov. Not some selfish, greedy type of happiness, but a holiday, a holy day. A day that's totally dedicated to the pursuits of doing what Hashem wants. Same thing with Sasain. What is true gladness? True gladness is Milah. A bris is given to a child at 8 days old. He's beyond understanding, and yet he commits himself to God, completely beyond intellect. That's the true source of gladness for a Jew. And of course, v'yikar elu tefillin. What is our honor? What is our honor? What is our beauty? What is our glory when we wear tefillin proudly? When it's clear upon us that we're Jewish and we're proud about it and we're not ashamed. And we don't back down like Mordechai, who did not bow down to Haman. Lo yichra v'lo yishtachava. And for that reason, Haman understood that the Jewish people were going to ultimately defeat him because they were truly proud. So Bezrat Hashem, for this year, we should have joy, light, gladness, honor physically. Of course, for our brothers and sisters in Eretz Yisrael, they could use some serious light and joy and gladness and honor. But for us to know also that our real light comes from Torah. Our real joy comes from holidays, etc., etc. And that's why, even though Purim is a busy day and there's so much to do today and there will be a lot done today. And by the way, a quick reminder to do all the mitzvahs, of course, hear the Megillah, give Mishloach Manot, a gift of food, 2 foods to a friend, Matanot Le'Avyonim, to give money to the poor, and Mishteh, to have a wonderful feast. Nevertheless, we make time in the morning, after Shacharis, after the Megillah, a long Shacharis, to learn Torah, to learn Rambam. And today is also a wonderful day in the Rambam because we're concluding a set of laws, the laws of Nedarim. So it's a wonderful thing that we make time today on Purim to study Torah, and with that we should indeed increase all the light in our lives. So we begin the Perek, Hilchos Nedarim, Perek Shleisha Asar, the laws of vows, chapter 13. We are talking about the dinim of hafara, annulment, the rights that a father or a husband have to annul the vow of their daughter or wife. And today the Rambam is going to talk about the mechanism of exactly how nullification works, along with other halachas related to that, and we're going to conclude with a general perspective on nedarim, on vows, as the Rambam delivers to us, and as he usually does at the end of a set of laws, he likes to reflect ethically on the concept discussed in these laws. And Bezrat Hashem, I'm going to share with you a wonderful sikha of the Rebbe, where the Rebbe explained the last halacha of this chapter at length in the most wonderful, beautiful way, but that we'll get to at the end. For now, we got to start from the top and get through the whole Perek Imritz Hashem. Says the Rambam halacha aleph, Mefer Adam oy mekayim divrei ishtoi oy bitoi. A man can nullify or certify, because I know we've been talking about the power to nullify, but there's also a power to certify. They can say, yeah, we want you to make this vow, and it'll be a good vow. So the father or the husband can either nullify or certify the vows made by his wife or his daughter b'chol lashon, in any language, va'afal pi she'eina makeres, even though she doesn't understand the language. She'eina isha tzricha lishmaya ha'hafara yakiyum, because the woman, it's not required for the woman to hear the nullification or the certification. The father has to do it, the husband has to do it. Once he does it, it's done. The Ketzad Mefer, what exactly is the way to go about annulling a vow? Says the Rambam, the wording that you choose needs to be precise. Oimer, the father or the husband says, mufar, it is nullified. Oy batal, or it's cancelled. Oy ein neder zeh klum, or this vow is of no substance, it's nothing. V'chayetze bidvarim, and anything similar in terminology, she'inyanam akiras haneder me'ikarai, whose topic connotes the uprooting of the vow from its root. This is a very important word here. The Rambam implies that the father or the husband, when they do hafara, when they nullify a vow, they uproot the vow as though it never was. That's why on the picture I chose a picture of a kind of a transparent home, as though there was a home, and now we're erasing it. It's totally as if it was completely uprooted from the start. Bein befana, bein la'achareha, whether he does it in the woman's presence or not in her presence. Avalim amar la, but if all he says is some other type of language, I don't want you to make a vow, or there is no vow, he has not nullified the vow. Or if somebody tells his wife or his daughter, it's pardoned for you, or it's permitted to you, also means permitted in Aramaic. Anything of the sort, he hasn't said anything. It's specifically the language of nullified, cancelled. Why? Because the way that a husband or a father revokes a vow is not in the same way as a sage releases a vow. As we learned earlier in these laws, that a sage can release your vow. Rather, what the husband does is he uproots the vow from its beginning and cancels it. Now, if you read this line simply, you get the impression that the husband's revocation is more powerful than that of the sage. As if to say, the husband uproots the vow as though it never was from the beginning, whereas the sage can only release the vow from here on out. That's the simple implication. However, yesterday we learned the exact opposite, that a sage releases vows in a way that he takes it away as though it never was, and a father, his revocation only works from here on out. I'll remind you the context. Yesterday, the Rambam was talking about a case where a woman made a vow, then transgressed her vow, and then her father heard about it and nullified it on the same day. Since he nullified it after her violation counts as a full violation because his revocation, which comes later in the day, doesn't work retroactively. Only the sage's revocation works retroactively. So how could the Rambam here seem to imply the exact opposite? That the father and the husband's revocation is more powerful than that of the sage, and it goes all the way backwards retroactively. So this, all the commentaries discuss, plenty of answers. I'm going to give you one, which is reflected in the Kesef Mishneh, one of the primary commentators here on the Rambam. And the Kesef Mishneh explains that this picture on the screen here is wrong. You see, here I displayed hafara as being more powerful. It erases the home completely. Hatara, which is the sage's power, as though it's a bulldozer, knocking down a home. There was a home, and it's just knocking it down from here on out. The truth is the opposite. The truth is that hatara, the release of the sage, is more powerful than hafara, is more powerful than the revocation of the husband or the father. However, it's powerful in a very nuanced way. Both the sage and the father and husband revoke the vows from the beginning, as though it never was. But there's two different types of as though it never was. One is a weaker type, the one of the father or the husband, as you can see it in the Rambam's language here, oiker. Oiker means to uproot. What happens when you uproot a plant? That's in the picture. The person's uprooting the plant. Uprooting the plant means there was a plant, and I uprooted it. There was a vow. The vow went into effect, and the husband or the father later comes and uproots it. Yes, when he uproots it, it totally disappears. But he's got to come and uproot it. What does a sage do? A sage erases the vow as though it never was. He doesn't take the vow and uproot it to make it disappear. He completely erases the whole effect of the vow to begin with. What's called as though it was a neder tos, as though it was a mistake. When you make a mistaken vow, it's not a vow. The sage can make your vow not a vow. The husband can, or the father can take away the vow, but taking away is very different than making as though it never was. And that's the difference in between the Torah sage and the father or the husband. With the power of the Torah, the sage can completely erase the vow retroactively, so retroactively as though it never was. The husband and father only oiker, they uproot it, also making it disappear, but disappearing from here on out. It says the Rambam Halacha Gimel v'ketzad mekayim. That was how to nullify a vow. How do you certify a vow? It's a scenario where the father or the husband tells the woman, the wife or the daughter, kayam lichi. It is certified for you. Some kind of expression here. I have a guy going, yeah, he's corroborating the vow. He's confirming the vow. He's letting the woman know that it's good, that he likes what she did. A yotha nadart. You made a nice vow. Nobody like you. If you didn't take the vow yourself, I would impose it on you. That's how much I want you to make this vow. Or anything similar which would imply that he desires this vow. Halacha dalid. We've learned so far two terms. Hafara, that's the husband or father's power to revoke the vow. Kiyum, the father or the husband's power to certify or confirm the vow. There's a third option that Rambam introduces now, which is called bitul. Bitul means cancellation. A person who actively cancels the vows of his wife or his daughter doesn't need to say anything. By actively canceling the vows, we'll soon see how you do that. It's an actual act that you take, a physical act. You have thereby nullified the vow. You don't have to say any verbal expression. When it comes to kiyum, you want to certify it, you got to say a word. When it comes to hafara, you want to revoke it, you got to say some words. When it comes to bitul, all you have to do is the act that demonstrates your cancellation, and that act cancels it to begin with. Says the Rambam, mahu habitul. What exactly is meant by active nullification? It's where the husband or the father will force his wife or daughter to do the exact thing which she prohibited upon herself. But when it comes to revocation doesn't mean the husband or father forcing her to act against her vow. He nullifies the vow and leaves her alone. She wants to, she can keep the vow. She doesn't have to keep the vow. The point is you verbally revoked it. But bitul means you're having her go against her vow actively. What would that look like? A woman takes a vow or an oath, she's not going to eat or not going to drink. If the husband simply tells her, or the father simply tells her, it's nullified for you, so he's nullified it. At this point, she's allowed to eat and drink. She wants to, she could. Doesn't have to. If he literally takes food or drink and he hands it off to her, he says here, take it and eat, take it and drink. She can then eat or drink, and the vow is cancelled on its own accord by virtue of the fact that the husband and the father expressed actively his desire to cancel the neder. When a person nullifies the vows of his wife or his daughter, he must verbally express it, actually say it, not just a mental decision. If he nullified it in his heart, it's not nullified. But when a person actively nullifies, again, it means he leads his wife or his daughter to actually do something against their vow. There's no need to say anything verbal. In his heart, in his mind, he decides mentally to cancel it. The koifa is salasis and forces her to go against the vow, and that's it. And here Rambam adds an interesting thing. When the husband actively nullifies his vow by leading the woman to do against her vow, whether or not she acts on it, the vow is nullified. The moment the husband does an act that demonstrates his willingness to have the wife desecrate the vow, that in itself is the nullification. And after that, it's already done. Halacha ches, mefirin nedarim b'Shabbos. We're allowed to nullify vows on Shabbos. Bein l'tzorech haShabbos, bein shalei l'tzorech haShabbos. Whether for the necessity of Shabbos or not for the necessity of Shabbos. Even if it's not needed for that day, he can nullify the vow. V'lo yoymar la b'Shabbos mufar lich kederech she'emer b'chol. However, on Shabbos you shouldn't employ the verbal aspect of nullification. You shouldn't say it's cancelled for you, like you would say during the week. You use the term of bitul. You, in your heart, in your mind, mentally decide to cancel it. And tell your wife or your daughter, here, eat, take, and drink. Anything like that. A person tells his wife or his daughter, a husband or a father wants to nullify oaths in advance. He tells his wife or his daughter, he says, listen, I'm going on a trip for a month. Any vows you make from now till I come back from that place are either certified or nullified, whichever one he wants. Le'amar klum. Meaningless. Doesn't work. But if he appoints an agent to be on the lookout for his wife's or daughter's potential vows, and then to nullify or to certify them, einay klum, it's also nothing. Shenemar, isha yekimenu, ve'isha yefredanu. Here's the verse. It says, any promise, any oath, isha yekimenu, ve'isha yefredanu. Only the husband can certify it. Only the husband can nullify it. And from the husband, we learn to the father that a father only himself can nullify his daughter's vows, not an agent. Halacha yut. Asra atzma b'te'enim va'anovim. A woman takes a vow, forbidding herself both to have figs and to have grapes. Bein beneder, bein bishvua, whether by a vow or by an oath. Bein sha'asar atzma b'chalamin, bein sha'amar teinin v'anavim elu, whether she forbade herself from the general type of fruit, all figs, all grapes, or just these figs, these grapes. The point is, there's two parts to her vow. There's a fig and a grape involved. The father or the husband, he liked part of the vow, he doesn't like the other part. He certifies the figs, nullifies the grapes. Or the opposite, he certifies the grapes, nullifies the figs. Very interestingly, what he certified is certified, and what he nullified is nullified. We are able to kind of separate and pull apart the two parts of the vow. And the same was true in any similar situations. Unlike the release of vows by a Torah sage, where we said the rule, neder shehutar miktsasai, hutar kulai. If part of a vow is released, the whole vow is released. When it comes to hafara, the power of revocation, only what's revoked is revoked, and everything else is not. We can divide the vows. And the reason for this goes back to the difference between the husband's and the husband or father and the Torah sage's power, as we explained it today. Both of them, again, achieve a retroactive nullification of the vow. However, one is, the sage's way is, where it makes the vow as though it didn't exist. Think about it. If you make the vow as though it didn't exist, so the whole vow doesn't exist. Even if you release part of the vow, you're saying that part of the vow didn't exist. Since that part of the vow was part of the whole vow doesn't exist. But when it comes to the father or husband's power, what's their power? Uprooting. Yes, they make it disappear, but they make it disappear. In other words, there's a vow, and they pull away at the vow. So if they pull away at only part of the vow, what do you do? If you pull away only part of a plant, how much is pulled out? Only the part you pulled out. So therefore, whatever part the husband nullifies or the father nullifies, that's the part that gets pulled away, and that's the part that is no longer part of the vow. Everything else is certainly in effect, and the woman is still bound to keep that part of the vow. A person's wife makes a vow, and he hears the wife makes a vow, and he attaches himself to her vow. By the fact that he attached himself to the vow, he shows his consent, and therefore he cannot nullify it anymore. Because in effect, he basically certified it for her. Said, I like it too. But if it was the opposite scenario, the husband makes the vow. The woman attaches herself to his vow. He can uproot, nullify her part, and keep his part. Let's visualize this. What does this look like? He hears his wife or his daughter saying, I want to be a Nazirite. By the way, starting tomorrow, we're going to be learning the chapters dedicated to the laws of the Nazir. A special type of vow. A woman, the wife or the daughter says, I want to be a Nazirite. The husband says, I like that. Me too. At this point, he cannot nullify the vow. And they both remain Nazirites. But if it was the opposite, the husband said, I want to be a Nazirite. The woman hears and says, me too. He can cancel her part of the vow, but his part of the vow remains in effect. And the same thing applies in all similar situations. A husband makes a vow for himself, and not she responds by saying me too. He then puts her under the vow like him. The Gomar Beliba the Hadira, having in mind, deciding mentally to put her under the vow. V'amra amen, and she says amen, accepting his vow. At this point, he can no longer nullify the vow. But if it was not in a way where he imposed the vow directly, he makes the vow first. And he puts her under the vow by way of a question, in a question tone, to find out whether she likes it or not. As though telling her, do you want this vow to be like me or not? And she says amen. Then, since her vow is really independent, he didn't put her under the vow and she says amen. He questioned her whether she wants to be under the vow. She took the vow of her own accord. It's like her taking a vow to begin with, and the husband or the father retains the right to cancel that vow. Ketzad. Again, let's visualize it, and here we'll use a picture that we actually had in the laws of marriage. Amar la, a person says to the wife, Harnini Nazir va'at. I am a Nazir, and you. So, and you, what does and you mean? And you could mean, depends on how you pronounce it, right? And you, statement, that means you too. But what about if you say, and you? No, what do you say? That's a question now, right? You're asking, what do you think? So if the husband says, I'm a Nazir and you, kiloymar va'at nazira kemaisi. He says it in a calm tone, which means, you're going to be a Nazirite like I am. The amra amen, and she says, amen, eina yachal lahafer. She only confirmed his vow. He was the one who did the whole expression of the vow. He can't nullify the vow. Amar la, but if he tells her, Hadini Nazir, I'm going to be a Nazirite. Umat Taimri. And what do you say? Ha'at Nazira Kemaisi. You want to be a Nazir like me? Amra Amen, and then she says Amen. At this point, she has taken the vow. And since she has taken the vow of her own initiative, the husband can nullify her vow. However, the Rambam adds something interesting. V'im heifer la, if you do choose to nullify her vow, shaloi batel, his vow is going to be nullified. Shazek kimishatala nidra benidra, because that's as though he depended his vow on her vow. I'm going to be a Nazirite, and what do you say? In other words, if you agree, I'll also take it. If she doesn't agree, or if she agrees and he nullifies her vow, retroactively he's nullifying his vow as well. Amra la, if she was the one who initiated, she says to him, Hareini nizira ve'ata, I'm going to be a Nazirite and you. Amar amen, and he says amen. Eina yachal lahafer, he cannot nullify this vow because he has thereby confirmed her vow. V'chein kol kayetzib, and the same applies in all similar situations. Halacha tezvav ha'isha shenadra, a woman makes a vow v'shama acher v'hitfis atzmei benidra v'amar v'ani. Somebody else walking by, a third guy, hears her making the vow, attaches himself to her vow, and says, me too. B'shama oviha oibayla v'hefer la, and the father, her husband, finds out and nullifies the woman's vow. Shalom mufar v'zeh shehitfis atzmei chayav. Fascinating. Her vow becomes nullified, but the person who attached himself to her vow does not become nullified. Now, in the earlier section of these laws, in the laws of vows, we learned that if a person attaches multiple things to a vow, if the initial element of the vow becomes released, everything becomes released. How come over here, when the woman's vow becomes nullified, the person who attached does not become nullified? We return to the same principle of the difference between the husband and father's revocation to the sage. The sage, the vow never existed. If the initial vow never existed, nothing that goes along with it ever existed. But for the father or the husband, all they do is pull out the plant. So, as long as the person attached himself to the woman's vow before the father or husband came in, at that point, he has added to the plant. When the father or husband pulls out the wife's part of the plant or the daughter's part of the plant, they haven't pulled out the part of the plant that was from the person that attached himself to the vow. His vow therefore remains binding, and their vow does not. You have a woman who is not in anybody's domain, not belonging to a husband or to a father. And she says the following. She's standing, today is Purim, that's why I put Purim on the slide. She says like this. Today is Purim. Today I want to eat meat. In a month from now, I'm going vegetarian. No meat for me starting in a month. And now, within 30 days, she gets married. So here, Rosh Nisan, 15 days from now, she gets married. Technically, technically speaking, the moment in which the vow takes effect, which is going to be here, on Erev Pesach, Yudalad Nisan, a month after she declared her vow. At the time the vow goes into effect, she will be married. The husband cannot nullify this vow. Because in the time she made the vow, she wasn't in his domain. And it's about this case exactly, where the Torah says, V'neder almana ugrusha. This is the vow that talks about a woman who is not in anybody's domain. She's a widow or divorced. She makes a vow. The Torah says whatever she forbade on herself becomes certified. That means that as long as she's in her own domain, when she made the neder, nobody else can come in later. Even if she was engaged to this man to whom she got married, she got a ring already from him, it doesn't work. Because as we explained 2 days ago, a husband does not have the power to nullify vows made before the marriage began. What if it's a little different scenario, okay? So here, she was not married when she made the vow. Now let's take a scenario where she was married and the marriage ended. She was married, again on Purim. She makes the announcement. She makes the vow while under her husband's jurisdiction that meat is going to be forbidden to her starting in a month. Or in 30 days, she's becoming a Nazirite. So here her husband's listening, and her husband nullifies the vow. However, he dies or otherwise ends the marriage through divorce within 30 days. Even though at the time when the vow should go into effect, she's already out of the husband's domain, she's still allowed to eat the meat, because while she was in the husband's jurisdiction, he nullified the vow, and that nullification was a good nullification, even though the vow was only going to take effect later. But we learned the other day that a father or a husband are able to nullify vows that even haven't yet taken effect. A widow or a divorced woman say, "Hareini asura bayayin kisha enase." When I get married, I'm going to be forbidden to have wine. Venisus, and she gets married. Ein abal yochel lahafer. The husband cannot nullify the vow. The vow was made before the marriage. Amra v'hitachas baila. If she says while under her husband's jurisdiction, "Hareini asura bebasar kisha es garesh." When I'll get divorced, I'll be forbidden to eat meat. Darei abal mefer. The husband could nullify the vow. Kishet is garesh tiyam muteres. And even when she gets divorced, she'll be permitted to have meat for the same reason that the husband's jurisdiction was upon her when he nullified the vow, and that's all that counts. That's all that matters. Halacha yutes hamekayin beliba. If somebody certifies his wife's or daughter's vow in his heart, it is certified. But as we explained, if the husband nullifies mentally, not verbally, it's not nullified. Therefore, for this reason, if a husband only mentally nullifies a vow, he can then verbally certify the vow. But once he certifies it in his mind, he cannot verbally nullify it unless he retracts within the time it takes to speak, which is halacha's determination of about 2 seconds, the time it takes to say, Shalom alecha Rabbi, peace unto you, my teacher. If that's how short he recanted and went from mental certification to verbal nullification, it's nullified. That's for that, we don't want to allow mental decisions to be more powerful than verbal ones. And that's why we say that if you recant in 2 seconds, it's good. Otherwise, no. Once you certified it in your heart, you cannot go back and nullify it. What if you're stuck? You certified your wife's or your daughter's vow. You didn't mean to. You didn't want to certify it. And now you regret it. What you can do is, like any other vow, you go to a sage, ask him to release your certification. He releases the certification. And the sage's power is what? Remember, a couple times already we're saying. The sage's power is to uproot it as though it never existed. He takes away the complete certification at its core. And so long as it's in the same day, he can go and nullify the vow. But if he nullified the vow and he regrets the nullification, here we don't allow a sage to release your nullification so you can go back and certify it. A woman is betrothed. She's in both domains. Father's domain, husband's domain. She makes a vow. One certifies, the other nullifies. Either the husband or the father alone certified and the other nullified. Even though the one who made the certification asks a sage to be released and the certification is released, he can't now go and join forces to nullify it together with the other partner, already nullified it. Because the fact that the father and husband work in partnership, as we saw 2 days ago at length, the fact that they work in partnership has to be a complete partnership. If one guy veered off the partnership and I want to come back, it doesn't work. They have to nullify it together, initially as one. Chav Beis, Amar Libita Eli Ishte, a person tells his daughter or his wife, Kayam lich, tells her twice. Certified for you, certified for you. V'nishal ala kama harishaina, and he asks to be released from the first certification. Hariyashniya chalalav, the second certification takes effect, and it's still certified. Amar la, if the husband or father tells her the following interesting combination, Kayam lich umufar lich, I want the vow to be certified for you and nullified for you. But I only want the certification to go into effect once the nullification goes into effect. So it seems like he's saying, in the end of the day, I want it to be certified. I want the vow to be nullified and then certified. What happens is, it actually works against him. It's nullified. He has clearly said he only wants the certification to go into effect when? After the nullification. But we just learned after nullification, there can be no certification. So we give validity to his nullification and we say, hey, nullified, now you can't go certify it. Amar lo kayam umufar lich. What if he just says it's certified and nullified for you, bevasachas, altogether? Harei kayam. Then we go after the certification and we make it. Amar lo kayam lichayim. Once a husband or father says it's certified for you today, harei kayam la'ilam, it's confirmed forever. Amar la mufar lich lemachar. If a husband or father says, I want the vow to be nullified tomorrow, and of course, a core element of the father's or husband's rights to nullify is he must nullify it on the day he hears about it. So he declares the vow nullified the next day, eine mufar. It's not nullified. Because in the meantime, he certified it today, and tomorrow he cannot nullify the vow. Commentaries here discuss interesting situation. He never actually certified it, right? He just implied by saying it's nullified tomorrow, so he's implying it's certified today. The question is now, can he today go ahead and nullify it? So some commentators say that Rambam implies that you could, and some say no, you still can't. By saying this, you've actively certified it today, and it's a full certification. Amar la kayin lichsha achas. Husband or father tells the daughter or the wife, it's confirmed for you for an hour. For the rest of the day passes and he never nullifies it. It's fully certified. We don't say certified for an hour means nullified after the hour. He never verbally expressed the word nullification. But if indeed he says, it's certified for you for an hour, and after the hour passes, he says, now nullified, there's a suffix, it's in doubt. Therefore, like in doubt, we always rule stringently. We say she's forbidden by her vow. If she transgresses her neder, she doesn't get the lashes. We can't hold her accountable. And now, from here on, the Rambam begins to talk about vows on a more ethical level. A person who makes a vow to establish his character or to fix the way he's been acting. He's considered to be an eager Jew, a praiseworthy Jew. What would that look like? A person was a glutton, addicted to eating too much meat. So he says, you know what, for a year, 2 years, I'm not going to eat meat. He was immersed in wine, and he wants to become sober. Takes a vow, forbids wine on himself for a long time. Or forbids himself to get drunk ever. Fascinating thing to learn about it on Purim. Of course, today we know there's a mitzvah to get drunk. But never at the expense of your mental health. A person who's addicted, of course, and should never even go there. And if you offer somebody a l'chaim and they say no, please understand them that they may be in recovery, and that's very, very bad, of course, for a person to slip up in that area. But if it's a positive inebriation, a positive drinking of wine, which can lead to positive effects in Avodas Hashem, then of course, you should embrace that. But here we're talking about a person who was too immersed. He needs to get away. Or somebody was chasing too much money. He always wanted more cash. So he forbids himself to take gifts, or he forbids himself to have pleasure from a certain country or region that was giving, too many lucrative business offers. Or a person was too arrogant about his looks, so he became a Nazirite. Nazirite does a little bit diminish your physical good looks. Or anything like it. Here, because his intentions were noble, it's actually a way of serving God. In these vows that sages said, vows can be a safeguard for restraint. They help you become more separated, more elevated. However, even though it is a way of serving God, you shouldn't, too much is too much. Don't have too many vows of prohibitions. Don't get yourself too used to them. You need to get sober. Sober up. Get away from the things that are interfering with your life without making a vow. This is, by the way, where it comes from to say bli neder. People say, I'll come to the event, bli neder. Bli neder means I don't want to make a vow because I don't want to be subjugated to the power of the vow, the severity of the vow. The Rambam, interestingly, in the beginning of the first book, in Hilchos Deis, the Rambam said that actually vows are totally not a good thing. He brought the words of the Talmud. It says, it's not enough for you what the Torah forbade for you. You have to go and forbid other things. And here the Rambam seems to be contradicting. He says, it's mamish serving Hashem if you're doing it for the right reasons. So many commentaries address this. The Rebbe once addressed this, and he said, it's talking about two types of people that are serving Hashem. The person in this scenario in Hilchos Nedarim is a person who is, he hasn't transformed his character. It's called his iskafia. He's constantly subduing his character. His character has bad tendencies, negative tendencies, and he wants to subdue it. So for that, it's actually good to make vows. You impose upon yourself that severity, that strength, and it helps you overcome the natural desires. In Hilchos Deis, the Rambam is talking about somebody who is at the level of ishapcha. He's transformed his character. And because he's transformed his character, so the permitted things are not going to get in his way. They're actually going to enhance the service of God. So to such a person we say, don't abstain. If you have the power, you've transformed yourself and you won't get negatively affected. So whatever is permitted, enjoy it. Whatever is permitted, find a way to make it godly. And I think today, even though we haven't transformed our character, it's probably fitting to act that way as well. Let's see what more things we can make holy. Instead of pushing it away, the Rebbe's way was always to engage with the world and refine it. Engage with the world, don't get sunk in it, but refine it. That has to be our approach as well. And now, in light of the fact that the Rambam just finished saying that it's not appropriate to make too many vows of prohibitions, the Rambam concludes with the following halacha. And we're going to explain this, hopefully a little bit at length, in light of the Rebbe's wonderful teaching. Amru Chachamim, the sages have told us, Kol hanoider ki'ilu bana bama. If anybody who makes a vow, it's as though he has built a bama. What's a bama? Of course, in the Holy Temple there was a mizbeach that was meant for offering sacrifices. And the Torah says that once you come into Israel and the Holy Temple is built, that's the only place to bring sacrifices. You shall not build any other altar outside of the temple. The altar built outside of the temple is called a bama, and it's forbidden to bring sacrifices on it. Building a bama is a very, very severe act because it could lead one to literally desecrate this prohibition of bringing a sacrifice outside of the temple. And the Rambam equates a person who makes a vow with somebody who builds a bama. That's how stringent it is. V'im avar v'nadar, so much so that if you transgressed and you made a vow of prohibition, says the Rambam, mitzvah lihi shoyel al nidrei. It's actually a mitzvah to have your vow released. So you don't have any stumbling blocks before you. When you're under a prohibition, right, you're always at risk of transgressing that vow. So because it's only a vow of prohibition, it's just a regular vow, it's a mitzvah to release it and get rid of it. The Rambam concludes, when do we say that it's a mitzvah to revoke the vow? When we're talking about a vow of prohibition. But vows of sacrifices, you vow to bring a korban, mitzvah lekaiman, actually don't get out of it. It's a mitzvah to fulfill them. Only in extenuating circumstances, under great pressure, should you ask a sage to have them released. Shenemar, because it says, Nedarim laHashem ashalem, I will pay up my vows to God, which implies that, when you're talking about Hashem, you want to pay up those vows. That's the simple meaning of this halacha. But I want to go for a minute a little deeper, especially because it's Purim. Oidus Torah I spoke about. We should learn a little extra Torah today, a little extra depth. And I want to share with you an insight from the Rebbe on this halacha. And I'm going to do it in the style of as though we were giving a class. Let's examine. Every word of the Rambam is exact. Let's examine some of the nuances in the Rambam's language. The Rambam begins by saying, Kol hanoider. Anybody who makes a vow is as though he built a bama, which is a negative thing. The Rambam is associating negativity with anybody who makes a vow. But in the very continuation of the halacha, he divides. He says, not everybody who makes a vow. Vow of prohibition you should get rid of. But a vow of sacrifices sounds like you should do it. So how could you say in one sentence that anybody who makes a vow, including sacrifice vows, it sounds like, as though you built a bama, and then you say, hey, go and do it. Doesn't make sense. The Rambam should say, hanoider nidre isar. If you make a vow of prohibition, then it's like building a bama. Why call hanoider? Then he says, you have to really believe in the truth of Torah and see how divine it is when you look at the exactitude of the words. The Rambam says, ki'ilu bana bama. It's as though he built in the past tense. Anybody who makes a vow, it's as though he built a bama. In Shulchan Aruch, when the Shulchan Aruch brings this law down, he says, ki'ilu boine bama. It's as though he's building in the present tense. If the Rambam says one way, Shulchan Aruch says another way, that means that there's a meaning here. We have to see why. Another point, the Rambam says, the reason you should get a sage to release your vow is because you don't want there to be a stumbling block in front of you. Now, in the Talmud, Jewish literature is full of things that we stay away from for fear of stumbling blocks. But the words we always use are, you shouldn't come to a stumbling block. This is a very unusual wording. You don't want to create a stumbling block before you. It's a bit of a strange language. Why is the Rambam choosing that expression? And there's another point which many of the commentaries bring up, not only the Rebbe. The Talmud has a double equation of vows to the bama. The Talmud says when a person makes a vow, it's as though he has built a bama, and if a person keeps the vow, it's as though he has offered a sacrifice on the bama, which is the actual forbidden act. And it's not inherently forbidden to build a bama. It's a risky thing because you might come to sacrifice something outside of Jerusalem. And the Talmud says when you make the vow, it's like building the bama. When you keep the vow, it's like bringing the sacrifice on the bama. Why doesn't the Rambam bring down that end part? If he wants to bring out how bad vows are, he should add that line. So one of the commentaries say, the Radvaz says, that it's not so simple. Most people who are afraid to stumble, they should annul their vow. But if a person is sure, imbari is the word he uses, if he's sure that he's not going to come to a stumbling block, so actually he could fulfill his vow. And about him, the Talmud didn't say that if you keep the vow, it's like a sacrifice. So the Radvaz says, since it doesn't apply to all people equally, the Rambam didn't bring it down. But the Rebbe says that doesn't work. Because the Rambam says, Kol hanoider. Anybody who makes a vow is in this category. Anybody in any situation. Plus, how could you even say that a person could be sure he's never going to sin? Pirkei Avos says, Al tamin ba'atzmach ad yom meisach. Don't believe in yourself till the day you die. How could a person say, I'm making a vow and I'm sure I'm never going to violate it? That can't be the reason. The simple reason, says the Rebbe, that the Rambam doesn't bring that second line is because in the very next line, the Rambam says that when it comes to consecration vows, you should go ahead and keep those vows and bring the sacrifice. So how could you say that if you keep your vow, it's like bringing a sacrifice on a bama, when the next line you say, if you keep the vow, it's actually a good thing, go bring your sacrifice. That's the reason why the Rambam doesn't bring it down. The question that remains is, what is the actual core difference? What is the difference between vows of prohibitions and vows of sacrifices? That vows of prohibitions are compared to building a bama, and if you were to go and keep them, it's really bad, therefore you should annul them. And when it comes to sacrifices, we say, no, go and keep them. So here the Rebbe introduces a wonderful halachic analysis. And he says, everything in Torah is exact. What is the equation to building a bama? You want to say something is bad? Say it's bad. You make a vow, it's like eating non-kosher. I don't know. Why when you make a vow, are we comparing it specifically to building of a bama? So here the Rebbe brings what the Ran, Rabbi Nissim, once said. He says like this. When a person builds a bama, or a person makes a vow, he's under the impression that he's doing something good. Torah has many prohibitions. I'm going to be like the Torah. I'm going to make more prohibitions. But in truth, says the Gemara to him, says the Rambam to him, when you make a vow, you're actually building a bama. What's a bama? A bama is somebody who thinks he's doing something positive. But Torah says no. The only place to bring sacrifices is in the Beis HaMikdash. You think you're being holier, you're actually not being holier. You're actually making a piece of altar that shouldn't be there. Now, what's the problem when you do that? In halacha, many times we have what's called a chakira, an analysis where we take apart a given circumstance and we analyze it from two perspectives. What is the problem with a person saying, you know what, I'm not going to bring a sacrifice in the altar, in the temple, I'm going to build an altar outside of the temple. There's two ways to look at the problem. One is called gavra, one is called chefza. Gavra means you look at the person, chefza means you look at the article. The person perspective would be to say, when you build an altar outside of the temple, you are doing something which is against the Torah. In the same way, when you take a vow, you're prohibiting upon yourself more things that shouldn't have been prohibited. It's your problem. Another way of looking at it, perhaps a deeper way of looking at it, and it is the Rambam's way of looking at it, is that the problem is in the article. When you take a vow that's unnecessary, you're actually effectuating a prohibition onto something which is permitted. It should be permitted, and you're making it prohibited. You're creating a prohibited substance. And in the same way, when you make an altar outside of the Beis HaMikdash, you're creating an altar. You're creating a piece of stone that's sitting there that shouldn't be there. And the Rambam holds of this approach. Because when the Rambam examined the Talmud, he saw that this statement was only brought down with regards to neders, not with regards to shvuah. Remember the difference at length we discussed. The difference between oaths and vows is that oaths are a prohibition on you, vows are a prohibition on the object. Since the Gemara brings this down only with regards to vows, the Rambam learned that the whole essence of this equation is an equation of the chefza, of the forbidden substance. That when you make a vow, you're creating a new piece of prohibition that shouldn't have been there. And because of that, it's like building a bama and it's negative. And therefore, you should get rid of it. And here we come to appreciate the Rambam's sweet language. He doesn't say ki'ilu baina, as if you're building a bama. That would imply the problem is on you. He says ki'ilu bana, as though it was built. Look, there's a piece of bama sitting on the street that shouldn't be there. In the same way, he says that the reason why you want to get rid of the vow is shelo yehi michshel lefanav, not so you shouldn't come to a stumbling block. So there shouldn't be a stumbling block sitting in front of you. But this whole problem, says the Rebbe, is only when it comes to regular vows of prohibitions. When it comes to a vow of a sacrifice, you haven't added anything new problematic. You haven't created any forbidden substance. You've created a sacrifice. You've created an obligation to give tzedakah. You've created a mitzvah, not a prohibition. And therefore over there, says the Rambam, while it is like building a bama, oh, I know you there. Anybody who makes a vow is like building a bama. But what's a bama? A bama is only a potential for bad. Doesn't have to play out as bad. Same thing over here. You make a vow for a sacrifice. Yes, you shouldn't have built it, but once you built it, bring the sacrifice in the proper way. Go to the temple and fulfill your vow. You know why? Here's where the Rambam's pasuk comes in so beautifully. The Rambam says, "Shenemar nedarai laHashem ashalim." I should pay off my vows to God. That's an interesting verse to bring. The Torah says, this is a verse in Tehillim. The Torah says, in the Torah, "Maitzas vasecha tishmar," keep the words that come out of your mouth. Bring that verse. Why bring this verse? Says the Rebbe, you have to read it differently. Nidarai laHashem, because my vow is a vow to God, therefore ashalem, therefore I'm gonna pay it up. When my vow is not related to God, when my vow is related to external things, so it's not a good thing. I've created a negative a negative substance. I should keep away from it. But if I made a vow that associates itself with God, not only should you keep it, ashalim, you should pay it up, bring the sacrifice that you're supposed to do. And that's the Rambam's message to us as we go away from the laws of vows. Making prohibited substances prohibited, no good. But sacrifices, dedicating yourselves to Hashem even more, that's a great thing. Brich Rachamana Desaya, and blessed is the merciful and God's assistance. Mazel Tov on this wonderful day of Purim for concluding the laws of vows.